There are exactly 3 things you don't do in our town mess. With the Friday chili cook-off, cut across Old Man Harper's corn maze before harvest, and open the Johnson family barn without permission, especially not when Grandpa's had his black coffee loaded, his 22, and is halfway through reading the Constitution out loud to the cows. The HOA patrol didn't get that memo at 8:42 a.m. on a Wednesday that smelled like rain and unfinished business. I watched Nancy from the HOA and her clipboard-wielding partner, Roy, creep across our gravel driveway like raccoons in khakis. They wore matching polos with Sunset Hills Community Oversight Committee stitched on the breast, an ironic name for a subdivision that hadn't seen a sunset since the Peabody family had. The old oaks bulldozed to improve visibility. Nancy squinted at the barn like it owed her money. I was live streaming a yoga session with our goats when she made a sudden beeline for the side door. "No trespassing, y'all." I called out, phone still in hand. Roy gave me the kind of smile you use on toddlers and people holding chainsaws. "Just checking on a code compliance issue," he said, stepping right over the painted warning sign Grandpa nailed up in '93. It read, "Private property, enter and meet Jesus. He's got questions." That's when everything changed. Grandpa stepped out from behind the tractor like a desert ghost wearing a full set of army fadings and chewing the same unlit cigar he's been threatening to quit since the Bush administration. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point a weapon. He just walked up to the barn door, gave it a once-over, and shut it with a calm, deliberate clang. Then he dropped the iron latch and spun the padlock shut like he was locking up after church. Inside, muffled voices rose to muffled yells. Roy pounded on the door, demanding release in the name of the HOA charter. Grandpa turned, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Ellie, go call the sheriff. I just detained 2 armed bureaucrats without probable cause." I stared. "Are they armed?" Spiritually, he said. By the time Sheriff Duke arrived in his dust-covered SUV, the neighborhood was buzzing like a beehive on espresso. Mrs. Jorgensen from 3 plots over was recording on her iPad. 2 middle schoolers rode by on bikes yelling, "Barn Heist 2025. Duke got out of the car rubbing his temples. This was the same man who once had to mediate a dispute involving a rogue rooster and a runaway bounce house. But even for him, this was new territory. "What the hell did you do, Walter?" he asked. "Prevented an unlawful search and seizure." Grandpa replied, arms folded like a constitutional scarecrow. "They're HOA, not the FBI, same difference when they ain't got a warrant." He said that was when something banged from inside the barn, not like a foot or a fist. More like something heavy being dropped. Everyone went still, even the cows quit chewing. "There's something in there," Nancy screamed. It moved, it moved." Grandpa didn't flinch. "Then maybe else shouldn't have gone in." To be fair, this was not our family's first skirmish with the HOA. The Peabody Committee had been at war with our household ever since Grandpa installed solar panels using World War II-era radio towers he borrowed from a decommissioned base. They didn't like his flagpole too high, his chicken coop too vocal, or his wind chime collection causes existential dread. But nothing drove them crazier than the barn. No one had been inside that barn except Grandpa, me, and a very confused UPS driver who never spoke again. Even I hadn't been past the first room. All I knew was that it had 3 padlocks, lead-lined walls, and a single overhead light. Grandpa only turned on after checking the sky. Ain't paranoia if they really did test weather machines in the 70s. He told me once Sheriff Duke scratched the back of his neck and asked Grandpa to open the door. "I will," Grandpa said, "once I finish my coffee and once you confirm what law these HOA folks thought they were enforcing by barging into my barn." Roy's muffled voice rose from inside. "There are stairs leading down." "What the hell is this place?" Nancy shouted. "I think there's something under the tarp." Grandpa's eye twitched just a little. Duke stepped back. "What's under the tarp?" "Walter, you don't want to know. I think I do." "No, Grandpa said you think you should big difference." That's when I did the dumbest thing in my entire 17-year-long existence. I snuck around to the side of the barn with my phone and opened the TikTok app. It felt like history, like standing at the edge of a weird, terrifying secret that had been fermenting in hay. In silence for decades, I angled the phone through a knothole in the wall. It was dark inside, but I could just make out Roy staring at a long metal object under a beige canvas cover. Nancy held her phone up with a flashlight on eyes wide. "I think it's a..." she began. Then the tarp moved on. Its own, Nancy screamed. Roy backpedaled, tripped over a bucket, and landed flat on his back with a crash. The barn plunged into total darkness. My live feed went black as my phone buzzed with thousands of notifications. Apparently, HOA officers uncover Area 51, and barn get locked inside was the kind of thing the internet liked to see back outside. Sheriff Duke had gone pale. Grandpa finally sipped his coffee. Y'all really ought to consider minding your own business. That's when the air above the barn shimmered like heat waves, but worse, a flicker of movement, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Something deep inside me said, "You were never supposed to see this," Ellie, Grandpa said softly. "Go unplug the weather vane." "What, the one with a blinking red light?" "You know the one." I knew the one. It hadn't blinked in years. Why, he looked at me with the same quiet gravity he used when telling war stories, because if that signal goes out, they're going to come looking dead. For the first time in my life, I realized Grandpa wasn't just eccentric. He was hiding something, and the HOA just kicked the damn hornet's nest. The barn had gone quiet again, too quiet, like the kind of silence that makes your teeth itch and your soul lean back from whatever's about to happen next. Sheriff Duke stood about 5 feet from a locked barn door, hand resting near his holster though he hadn't drawn it. Grandpa just leaned against a fence post sipping his coffee. Like it was any other Wednesday, but it wasn't. Something inside that barn had moved, maybe breathed, and 2 HOA patrol officers were trapped inside with it alongside a Cold War mystery Grandpa had buried deeper than his feelings. I tried to act normal, but my phone was buzzing. Non-stop my video from earlier. Just a few seconds of Roy shrieking and a blurry tarp slithering had gone viral. Courtney Gate was trending. People thought it was a prank or maybe performance art. One guy in Texas offered to buy the barn site unseen and turn it into a paranormal Airbnb. Another user was convinced we were harboring a decommissioned military android. Grandpa looked at my phone once and muttered, "Only thing more dangerous than secrets is people trying to monetize them." Inside the barn, someone knocked against the door. Sheriff Duke hesitated, then called out, "Y'all all right in there?" Roy shouted back, No, we're not. There's something down here." We found a trap door and went down a set of stairs, and now the lights are flickering and the floor is humming. Nancy added, "Also, I might have touched something." I shouldn't have touched. That got Grandpa's attention. He straightened up, narrowed his eyes, and said, "What did you touch?" "I don't know. It looked like a control panel. I thought it was a fuse box." Grandpa swore under his breath. "They powered up." Sheriff Duke blinked. "Powered what up? The vault?" Grandpa said, "I never told anyone because I never thought anyone would be dumb enough to break into a classified prototype bunker built by 2 paranoid brothers and a suspicious amount of army surplus." "You have a bunker?" Duke asked. Grandpa said, "Until 5 minutes ago, when the HOA turned it into a liability. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me was furious. He'd never told me any of this. Another part of me was trying to figure out if we were about to be swarmed by federal agents or visited by something that shouldn't exist." Grandpa put a hand on my shoulder and said, "If this goes sideways, you need to grab the blue folder from under the kitchen sink and head to the Jorgensens. They have a radio that still works." "That's oddly specific," I said. "So is the trouble coming our way?" He replied meanwhile. More neighbors had gathered. People were pulling out lawn chairs like it was a 4th of July cookout. Cynthia Peabody arrived in a Mercedes with diplomatic levels of indignation. She stepped out in designer boots and pointed a French manicured finger at Grandpa. "You are harboring illegal structures, detaining committee members, and possibly endangering the entire subdivision," she declared. Grandpa looked at her like she'd grown 2 heads. "And you broke federal trespassing laws, attempted to access restricted technology, and woke up something I've been trying to let die peacefully." Cynthia stepped toward the barn, but Duke held up a hand. "No one goes in. Not yet. I have every right." "You have the right to remain silent," Duke said, surprising all of us, "and to wait here while we figure out what exactly your HOA members activated in that barn." At that moment, a high-pitched whine came from inside the barn, like a turbine spooling up the metal siding, began to tremble. Lights flickered across the weather vane. Even though I'd unplugged it, like Grandpa said, he looked at me. "Did you pull the backup battery?" "What backup battery?" He groaned the one under the fake feed bin. I didn't even bother asking. I just ran behind me. The barn doors began to glow faintly around the edges, and the whining sound leveled into a steady, menacing hum. Some folks backed away. A few brave souls moved closer. Mrs. Jorgensen took a video on her iPad while holding her dog like it was her last line of defense. I found the feed bin, flipped it, and yanked a car batteryized block of tech out from under a tarp. The second I disconnected the cables, the hum died. The light stopped. The barn went silent. Then Nancy screamed. Not a normal scream. This one was longer, rising, the kind you make when you see something so wrong, your body forgets how to breathe. Sheriff Duke ran to the door and unlocked it. Roy and Nancy stumbled out, both pale and shaking. Nancy collapsed into the grass. Roy looked like he'd seen a ghost riding a tank. There's a chamber. He gasped, downstairs with monitors and wires and a tank. A cryo tank. Grandpa exhaled slowly. Eyes closed, Duke asked, "What's in the tank?" Roy glanced at Grandpa and then at me. "You won't believe this, try us. There's a man in it, frozen alive." Dead silence again. Even the wind held its breath. Cynthia Peabody's mouth opened and closed like a fish in a daze. Grandpa said nothing. He just went into the barn, stepped inside, and vanished down the stairs. Duke regarded me. "Ellie, is there anything that you know that could help us sort out what's going on here?" I shook my head. "Only that my grandpa's been saying for years the government tried to erase his brother. Everyone thought he was crazy. Maybe they were wrong." Cynthia regained her voice. "I demand access. That property is within Sunset Hills boundaries and subject to compliance." Sheriff Duke turned on her. "Lady, I will have you arrested for obstruction if you say one more thing about compliance while I'm trying to handle what may or may not be an unauthorized human cryo storage facility." The barn lights flickered again. Grandpa reappeared at the top of the stairs. "He's still alive," he said, "vital, stable. Same as the day I put him in, you put him in there." Duke said. Grandpa looked at him, a deep sadness in his eyes. "I didn't have a choice. He knew things dangerous, things they were going to disappear him. So we disappeared him, our way." And now Grandpa glanced at me. "Now I need your help, Ellie, for what to tell the world the truth." And just like that, I realized I was in way over my head, but I also knew I couldn't walk away. Whatever secrets Grandpa had been keeping, whatever truths were buried in that barn, they were mine now too. Whether I liked it or not, the sun had barely cleared the ridge when the first black SUV rolled into town. No tags, no local plates, no dust, just matte paint, tinted windows, and the kind of precision parking that said, "We've done this before." 3 more followed, forming a quiet blockade around our property, like wolves circling a wounded animal. Nobody got out at first. They just waited, windows up, engines running, heat humming off the hoods. Everyone else on the street had already cleared out, mostly thanks to Sheriff Duke walking door to do, suggesting that today might be a good time to go visit relatives in the next county. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, phone in my pocket, buzzing with notification after notification. Last night's live stream had crossed 5 million views. People thought it was an elaborate hoax, a viral marketing campaign, even reboot of some 80s sci-fi franchise. They didn't know that what lay beneath our barn wasn't CGI. It was blood sacrifice, and the kind of secrets too big to be buried, even under decades of silence and hay. Grandpa came out holding a tin cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. He didn't speak, he just stared at the SUVs, like they were an old familiar sickness coming back for another round. I watched his jaw tighten, watched the weight of 50 years settle across his shoulders like an invisible rucksack. Then without a word, he turned and walked back toward the barn. I followed. The cryo chamber's glass had defrosted just enough to see a face now. Pale, still suspended in time, like some tragic monument, the man inside looked just like Grandpa. Only younger, his twin brother Billy, his ghost made flesh. "They're not here for the HOA officers," Grandpa said, eyes on the tank. "They're here for him. They know who he is. They knew before we did," he said. Billy was part of a project during the Cold War. Something about remote data harvesting, long-range behavioral prediction. They called it Project Tapestry. That sounds made up. It wasn't. They used people like Billy, smart, idealistic, loyal. He figured out what they were doing, what they'd done. So he tried to go public. They tried to erase him. You froze him. No, we preserved the truth upstairs. Boots hit the gravel. Quiet but certain Sheriff Duke met them at the edge of the drive, hand on his hip, but nowhere near his gun. The first man out was clean-shaven gray suit, eyes like sharpened glass, no name tag, no ID. He didn't need one. Authority oozed off him like oil from a crack drum. "We're here for Walter Johnson," the man said. "You'll need to be more specific." Duke replied, "There are two of them now. We have jurisdiction over a barn." Duke smiled thinly. "Show me the paperwork. There won't be any." "Paperwork? Then there won't be any cooperation." I watched from behind a slat in the barn wall. Heart beating too fast, these weren't HOA officers. They weren't even standard Fed types. These men moved like predators. I could feel it, the way animals do, right before a storm breaks. Grandpa was right. They weren't here to ask questions. They were here to clean up a loose end. They didn't wait. Two agents flanked the barn, and another walked straight toward the front. Grandpa stepped out before they could reach the doors. "If you take one more step," he said, "I'll assume hostile intent." The agent didn't stop. "You're harboring stolen federal assets. That cryogenic unit is property of the United States government?" "No," Grandpa replied. "That man is my brother, and he's not a property. He's a witness, not anymore." That's when I stepped out, phone recording in one hand, microphone pinned to my shirt. Actually, he still is. And this stream's going out live to over 7 million people, including 2 journalists from New York and a conspiracy subreddit that hasn't slept since 2008. The agent hesitated just slightly enough. "Any move you make on this property," I continued, "will be documented, broadcast, and archived. You take that tank, you're not just stealing a man. You're erasing evidence that's obstruction, kidnapping, maybe even attempted murder, depending on what your plans are once he's in your custody. And if something happens to my grandfather or to me, this whole story goes nuclear behind me." Grandpa gave a quiet grunt of approval. Duke looked both horrified and vaguely impressed. The agent smiled like a shark, pretending to be a man. "You're bluffing, am I?" I said, holding up the phone. "Go ahead." Blink, the agents backed off, not far, just enough to give the illusion of compliance. But the threat remained. They regrouped near the SUVs, clearly waiting for backup orders or darker alternatives. Grandpa Duke and I stood together like a last line drawn in dirt. Then Cynthia Peabody appeared again, completely uninvited, with a stack of papers in her hand. "I have documentation," she declared as HOA president. "I demand Cynthia." Duke said without turning, "If you speak again, I swear to God, I'll arrest you for reckless idiocy." She paused, blinked, and for once had the good sense to shut up. The barn lights flickered. The hum started again this time. It wasn't just the tank. The monitors had reactivated. Billy's vitals were climbing slowly, steadily. His eyes fluttered once beneath frost-lined lashes. "He's waking up," I whispered. Grandpa nodded. "He's got about 5 minutes, maybe less. Then what?" "Then they'll do everything they can to stop him from speaking." He turned to me. "Place something small in my hand. A memory stick. If I don't make it get this to someone who still gives a damn." There's names on there, timelines, tape stuff. Billy collected before they found him. The truth, Ellie, the kind that gets people killed. "I'm not letting anything happen to you. Don't promise that," he said. "Just promise you'll finish the story." Billy's eyes opened. It wasn't dramatic. Like in the movies, no gasping breath, no thunder crack, just a slow return to consciousness, as if waking from the longest nap in history. He looked around through the glass. He saw Grandpa. He saw me. His lips moved, and I swear, I read one word: run, but we didn't run. We held the line because the truth was finally awake, and some things once exposed don't go back into the dark, not without a fight.